Hey Wolfpack, and welcome back. I hope all is well, and I hope you had a good week. Today, we're reading 3 scary police stories. Are you on the force or know someone who is on the force with their own encounters? Please email me or submit it to my subreddit. Both are linked down in the description below. With that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. Now, I will begin by saying I have many stories, but this is the one that has stuck with me over the years. When I was a rookie, probably only on the force for a year or two when this first happened. When I was a rookie, I was called to a possible domestic abuse case. The mother called it in. But, anyways, when I pulled in and got out of my vehicle, I could already smell it. I had only been with the force for a year at that point, but I had already become accustomed to the smell of something dead. I went to the door and pounded, and finally someone answered. This middle-aged, lanky, pale, tall, and skinny guy. He already had an expression of confusion mixed with fear, and I had stated the reason that I was there. Said that there was an anonymous tip, but as soon as I said that, his already pale face went as white as snow. I asked him if I could come in and take a look around, and he obviously did not let me, but it didn't matter. I had a warrant. And I went in and looked around and called out for the girl, and by my utter dismay, she came downstairs and my heart started pumping because not only was she not the person that I believed was dead, she looked perfectly fine. And now, in thinking, what is that rotting smell? So, I started looking around, and when I couldn't find anything, I had no other choice but to leave. So, a few weeks have passed, and I got another call from dispatch that the mother had called again. So, I was already freaked out. So I went back and got out, and surprisingly, couldn't smell anything. Okay, so I started thinking maybe I was just smelling a deer or something rational. And I walked up to the door, and I convinced myself I was just overreacting, because I was still pretty new myself. I got up to the door and knocked again. The same guy answered, and I asked if I could come in and look around, and this time he said yes. I walked in, looked around, the girl came down again, looking perfectly fine, and now I'm thinking, why am I getting called here? There are no signs of abuse whatsoever, and I just wanted to look around some more. I went upstairs, nothing. Checked the basement, nothing, and then I saw some kind of a shed. And I was intrigued. There's a padlock on that door. What is in there that needs such large protection? And this wasn't some tiny padlock either. This was an industrial-sized one. So, I'm already suspicious, and I asked to go out there and take a look around, and instantly they refuse. So, I'm like, okay, they're definitely hiding something. I go to court to get a warrant under suspicion of abuse. I go back and show them, and they start frisking, making excuses as to why they can't show me, like, oh, they lost the key, so they can't open it, on and so forth. I finally get them to open it by the threat of them both going to jail for obstruction of justice, and that got them to open it. We go out and they get the key. They open the door, and as soon as they do, I can smell it again. And now I'm thinking there's something wrong, because I looked, and there was nothing in there. It was a normal shed, no obvious signs of anything, and I start really looking, pulling things out, the whole 9 yards. When I pulled over a tarp that was hanging around, I was greeted by the horrific scene of 5 to 6 human body parts, arms, legs, a torso with no head, and immediately, when I saw that, I turned around to confront them, but I was met with this guy swinging a bat. I began to pull out my weapon and fire 2 shots straight into his chest, and that was the first and only time I've ever killed someone. I will never forget the sound it made as the bullets made impact with his chest. Just 2 thuds. I went back and cuffed the girl as well, She was wailing and flailing the whole time. I called in for backup and, obviously, a coroner. We brought the girl back to the station for questioning. When we brought her in, and she started spilling, she was talking about how it was a dispute over drugs. Then, she switched her story to say she didn't know anything. It was clear she was not stable. But she finally confessed about what it really was. She said her and her boyfriend were part of a cult, where they would kill random people as sacrifices. And the reason they were so hesitant to let me in the first time is because the person they had killed a week before I came was still in the house, so I would have found them. But as soon as I left, they moved it into the shed, and she said the padlock was brand new because that's not usually where they kept the bodies. When she said the bodies, I instantly knew we were dealing with something more because she said there were somewhere between 15 and 20 bodies buried on the land. So, needless to say, she was sentenced to life in prison later on. The courts were pushing for the death penalty, but there was not enough evidence that she had killed the people that we had dug up. The reason I'm writing this now is because we were never able to find out what cult they were a part of. But, only a few hours ago, I got a letter in the mail with the words, "Are you ready?" with the name of the man that I had killed on it. I have never been so scared in my life, and I just know, I have a gut feeling something bad is going to happen. I will keep you guys updated on what's going on in the upcoming weeks. Edit. It has now been a week since the letter came in the mail, and things are getting more and more intense by the day. I don't know how these people got my address, but even being a 50-year-old man, I am scared as a little kid. I have been planning on going to a hotel to try and stick this out, because the 30-year anniversary of the man's death is coming next week, and I don't know what is going to happen. I'm a police officer in a small town in the southern part of the United States, as a lot of you may have already heard. Due to the outbreak, we are advised not to take any part in self-initiated activities. This includes traffic stops, field interview contacts, as well as the occasional foot patrols. For some of us, this is sort of like a vacation, taking it easy. Myself, though, I'm not enjoying it too much at all. You see, I love self-initiated activity. Anything to stop crime, am I right? But since this mess, most of our shifts are spent either driving around the city and patrolling the neighborhoods, which is extremely boring, or sitting in your unit watching Netflix all night. Occasionally, we'll meet up and just shoot the shit, anything to pass time. Our calls have been narrowed down as well to calls involving domestic disturbances, or anything that involves violence. Sucks for the citizens because we're basically saying that they're shit out of luck when it comes to anything else. I'm not writing this though to complain about the whole situation. No, I'm writing this to send a warning to everyone out there. Stay in your homes at all cost, especially during the night. I just want to point out that I am in no way denying that the illness exists. The virus alone is scary itself, but what I saw last night shook me to the core and leads me to believe that there is something else out there as well. My shift starts at 6 p.m. and doesn't end till 6 a.m. So, I came in expecting last night to be just like the other nights. While we were briefing the day shift sergeant made a statement. Per chief's orders, night shift guys just hang out at the PD. If you get your calls, take them, but chief doesn't want y'all to drive around at night until further notice. Every one of us gave each other a puzzled look, and the day shift sergeant made a gesture with his hands as if to tell us his orders, not mine. Are we allowed to pick up food? One of the guys asked. If you're gonna pick up food, do it now while the sun is still out. If I were you guys, I'd pick up enough food to last you through the night. I think Chief said the mayor ordered the gas stations and 24-hour drive-thrus to close down as well, Sergeant stated. It seemed like the more the sergeant spoke, the more confused everyone became. Is the mayor allowed to do that? Close everything down for the night? Asked a voice from the back. Look, I don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but Chief was pretty adamant about staying at PD. Maybe they're trying to deter people from leaving their homes to enforce a self-quarantine. I don't know. But just do what you have to do, and come back before it gets dark, Sergeant said. So, at that, day shift clocked out, and we made our way to our units so that we could go pick up some food and drive around for a bit. We all agreed that we'd stay away from the local grocery stores only because they were still packed with people trying to get whatever groceries they could buy after the panic buyers caused a shortage. I went to the local burger joint, Whataburger, and ordered a couple of burgers from the drive-thru. When I got to the window, I spoke with the cashier and asked her about the night closing. We're not sure why we're closing either," she said in a confused way. "I thought you guys would be the ones to know." I shook my head. "No, they didn't really tell us anything. I kinda wish they had told us before we came to work. I could have brought my Switch or something," I said. With this, the cashier chuckled and handed me over my food. I drove back to the PD and entered the squad room. Some beautiful bastard went to Walmart and brought an HDMI cable so that we could connect a computer to the TV that we had in there. Johnson logged into his Netflix account, and so began our cop movie marathon for the night. By the time we had reached 1 a.m., we hadn't received any calls. We spent most of our time continuing to watch movies, bullshitting with dispatch, or making up ridiculous games to keep ourselves entertained. It was at this time that I got the itch to take a drive. I looked over at Herlock and told him, "Hey, I know that Chief wants us to stay here, but I'm going to go take a drive to clear my head." Herlock gave me a look in disbelief. "You said what?" he exclaimed. "I'm just going to cruise for a bit, that's all." I began to walk to the door. The festivities in the room then came to a halt as everyone gave me the same look of disbelief. "You know we're supposed to be staying here, right?" Simpkins said. "Yeah, but I just need to clear my head. I also want to check out and see if everything's closed like the mayor ordered them to," I said. "Hey, if there's a gas station open, could you bring me back a bang?" "If you get me one, I won't snitch you out," yelled Bigler, who was wrapped in evidence tape like a mummy. "I'll bring you all the bangs if you keep your mouth shut," I replied. At this, the guys made cheerful woos, and then I exited through the door and got in my unit. Upon leaving the PD, I drove through the main roadways and was surprised to see that everything had in fact closed. Even the lights to all the businesses had been shut off. There's an eerie feeling you get when you see a town become so empty and lifeless. The Circle K gas station looked abandoned, and the beautiful W to the Whataburger, which was always lit due to the restaurant being open 24 hours, was finally without light. I parked and rolled down the window to see what I could hear, and was surprised that the only things that could be heard was the sound of my engine idling and a variety of different insects performing their usual symphony. I drove over to the east part of town and conducted a light patrol through the neighborhoods. I didn't expect to find anything out of the ordinary from what I've been seeing these past few nights, but lo and behold, there was a man walking in the middle of the roadway. He was about 3 blocks ahead of me, walking away from me. I began to close the distance between us. Then, I realized that he was a regular of ours, Connor Peters. Peters wasn't a hard criminal, only a drunk who occasionally stole beers. Lots of beers. I debated whether I should check out with dispatch, being that they have to know our location in case shit hits the fan and backup needs to be sent. But decided not to because I was breaking the rules already anyway. As far as I know, there shouldn't be anyone walking around at this time due to the whole self-quarantine orders. So, I pulled up next to Connor and simply asked, "Hey man, what are you doing out so late?" Connor stopped walking and looked at me. "Hey officer, I just wanted some beers and all the frickin' gas stations are closed," he said. "Hey, well, I thought I'd just let you know that you're not really supposed to be out here right now." Connor laughed. "I thought you weren't supposed to be stopping people." "Touché, Connor. Touché. I'm just making sure that you're okay. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you, you know? I usually always say this when I stop people in the street." "Freaking stupid this thing is," Connor said. "I saw a video online where they said that the government is making this whole thing up to test how willing we are to give up our rights." I looked at the invisible camera and gave it a Jim Halpert face. "No one's taking your rights, man. Just go home and..." Suddenly, the sound of a woman screaming came from ahead of us. Connor and I both looked at each other as if to validate if we both heard the scream. Without thinking, I rolled the window up and stepped out of my unit. I should have checked out with dispatch at this time, but I didn't. Hey, they always say that hindsight is 20/20. Neither Connor nor I said anything. I began to slowly walk in the direction that the scream came from. "What do you think that was?" Connor asked in a whisper. I didn't answer him. I was listening to the silence in case another scream came. A gunshot came from my right, 2 houses down. "Stay here!" I ordered Connor. Connor was in a squat position near the driver door to my unit. I drew my weapon and called out on the microphone to my handheld radio. "PD, I have a gunshot coming from the 700 block of Houston Street." I made my way closer to the house, using the darkness and nearby parked cars as cover, since I didn't know what the threat exactly was. When I was approximately 30 feet from the house, the sound of glass breaking caused me to take cover behind a nearby tree. I looked at the house and discovered the source of the glass breaking. A figure had either been thrown through the window or voluntarily jumped through it. The figure laid on the ground almost motionless. Because of the soft moans of pain coming from the figure, my brain registered that it was a woman. Suddenly, another figure jumped out of the window and onto the woman on the ground. It was at this time that I pointed my weapon at them and turned on the flashlight attachment to my gun. I saw everything clearly then. A pale woman with dark hair and eyes the color of night was on top of another woman who looked at me helplessly. The pale woman wore a black dress that covered her arms, save for the hands. Her hands were just as pale as her face, and I noticed that protruding from her fingers were those long, yellow claws that looked as if they could pierce metal. The disturbing feature about this woman, though, was her mouth. Her mouth was covered in blood, with sharp teeth protruding from her gums. A hiss came from the pale woman as she began to wrap her clawed hands around the other woman's neck. The woman on the ground let out a choked scream. The pale woman then looked me in the eye, said something in a language that I didn't understand, and bit into the neck of the woman on the ground. The woman tried to scream, but she was only able to make gurgling noises. A million things were running through my mind. I already had my gun drawn and pointed at the pale woman. Do I go less lethal? Do I go hands-on and try to pull the pale woman off? Do I shoot? All these thoughts sped through my brain at 100 miles an hour. If I didn't do something quick, the pale woman could possibly end the other woman's life, or better yet, attack me next. It was then that I decided to shoot. For those of you who have never shot another living being before, there's always this moment where you shoot your weapon and you can feel a surge of adrenaline hit your heart. It causes you to go cold for a second. Then, you're hit with a shock that you didn't actually shoot your weapon. You realize that your brain may have pulled the trigger, your body didn't respond, and you're left standing there frozen. That's exactly what happened to me at that moment. I heard slurping sounds coming from the pale woman. Her mouth was glued to the other woman's neck. The woman on the ground stopped struggling and making any noises. She was gone. Once rationalization of that hit me, I was able to pull the trigger to my weapon and hit the pale woman on the top of her head. She immediately began to shriek in pain. The sound of her shrieks pierced my ears and caused me to wince. The pale woman continued to shriek and flew into the air faster than anything I've ever seen. I found myself repeating, "Oh shit," over and over as I stood there not believing what I had seen. The sound of Connor screaming from behind me broke me out of my trance. I turned to Connor's direction and saw him being held by the neck by a tall, pale man dressed in black, similar to the pale woman. The pale man looked at me with the same black eyes and shouted something in that same language. Connor continued to struggle and kicked the man in the abdomen area. The pale man turned to Connor and crushed his neck, causing Connor to go limp. The pale man then smiled at me, displaying his razor-like teeth, and spoke again in that unknown language. He then flew into the sky with Connor in his arms, just as the pale woman had. I ran over to the spot that where they last stood and stared up into the sky, dumbfounded. I reached for my radio and called out, "PD, status on backup." No reply. Again, I called out, "PD, status on backup." Nothing. That's when I discovered that I had forgotten to turn on my radio when I exited my unit earlier. No one heard me. No one would have known where I was. It's kind of funny when I think about it now, but at that time, it felt like a rock had hit me in the stomach. That feeling got worse when I turned to the spot where the woman on the ground was laying, only to find out that she wasn't there anymore. Porch lights began to turn on as neighbors began to wake up, probably to discover the source of the commotion. I then did the most unpoliced thing a police officer could do. I got into my unit and drove off. I don't know why I did it. I felt like I was on autopilot. I drove past the PD, past the city limits, and just continued to drive. I don't know where I was planning to go. What would I do if I got there? Or how I was going to explain my actions. I'm pretty sure that there's a bolo out for me right now. State troopers are probably looking as well as other agencies. What happens when I'm caught? I have so many questions and no answers. I can't help but feel like my chief may have known something about this. It's probably why we were ordered not to leave the PD. I should have just listened. Now, here I am, writing this up so I can post it online as a warning. I hope that to whoever's reading this takes it seriously and listens to me when I say stay inside. Don't go out at night. Fortify your house any way you can. If you hear knocking at your door or windows in the late hours of the night, ignore it. There's something out there other than a virus that's more dangerous. Something that I can't explain. It's out there, and it's hungry. My dad used to be a great dad. He used to take me out to watch baseball games, and we used to play soccer whenever he was free. He worked nights, but he still made as much time as possible for me and my mom. He was a great dad. Around the time I turned 10, he changed. He became a recluse, spending as much time away from home as possible, and when he had returned for a new shirt or a shower, he reeked of cigarettes and alcohol. He stopped being able to look me in the eye, choosing to ignore when I asked him to play with me outside. This spiraling into despair eventually caused my mom to file for divorce, and my dad settled for custody every other weekend. About 2 years later, he left his job and started going to therapy. Now, as I turn 22, he's still not the happy-go-lucky man from 12 years ago. Just more complacent and slightly somber. I decided to visit him for the week, see how he was getting on. He never remarried, nor had a girlfriend after my mom. Not that I would be completely aware if he had, but I feel like he would have probably mentioned it at some point. To be honest, I had some ulterior motives with the visit. Reading some of the stories on Reddit about EMTs, police, and search and rescue officers, and their creepiest experiences on the job, made me want to find out if my dad had anything horrifying to relay to me. I sort of wished I hadn't asked him now. What he told me was a lot worse than some paranormal being lurking in the woods. It was downright disgusting. It was 2008, and you had just turned 10, remember? I brought you that little red bike. Yeah, you used to ride that damn thing all inside the house, and your mother went ballistic. Not on the carpets, Johnny! It was pretty funny. Anyway, it's winter, so the roads are seriously icy. The snow is coming down heavy. It was almost like a blizzard. Rick and I, you remember Rick, right? Big black mustache, got shot in the foot in 2009 during a drug bust. He used to come to all your birthday parties. Well, it doesn't really matter if you can't remember him. It's not that important that you know what he looks like. We're parked on the edge of an intersection on the highway to watch for speeders and idiots without their headlights on. Pretty boring stuff. So, we're just sat there when suddenly the radio turns on. Request backup to a house in the rough part of town. We'd only been parked there for 10 minutes, but it was a long 10 minutes. So, we're thinking, oh hell yeah, some real work. And so, we bust our asses over there, fast. Well, as fast as we could have. Like I said, the roads were icy. When we arrived, we realized there's only one other cop car there, with 2 officers stood near the hood of the car, waiting for us, pistols locked and loaded in their hands. Now, I cannot for the life of me remember their names, but one of them was a young fella, new and all. We'll call him B, and his other partner A. They're briefing us for the situation. A little boy called from inside the house. Identified himself as missing 9-year-old Samuel Morrison. Said a man had snatched him off his bike and taken him to the abandoned house. Apparently, the perpetrator had a mobile phone that the boy managed to sneak away to call 911 with. So, A busts down the door, tells anyone who's in the house to show themselves now. This house is a big one. Let me tell you that. It's 3 stories high with a basement and large, open, empty rooms. Nobody shows themselves. So, we keep clearing room after room, slowly ascending through the house. Every step causes large creaks to echo around us, and if I'm honest with you, kid, I was thoroughly freaked out. Something just didn't sit right with me. We decided to split up, A and B taking the basement, and Rick and I making our way to the top floor. The thing is, the house barely looked lived in at all. The whole thing smelt of bleach, and there were no cobwebs or anything. It just seemed clean and new and preserved. You know that feeling of just pure dread? When your stomach feels as though it's being dragged on the floor behind you? I never really had experienced that feeling until that day. When we finally reached the top floor, we noticed a small, shadowy figure standing in the last room at the end of the hallway, facing us. Rick shouted at it, something like, "Hey Samuel, you're safe now. It's us, the cops." But when we got closer, and I shined my flashlight at it, nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. It was Samuel all right, but not as we hoped to find him. His eyes were sewn open, and they rolled back into his head. His skin was pale and blotchy, and his swollen tongue lolled out of his mouth. He had strings attached to his wrist, head, waist, and knees, causing him to seem as though he were standing upright. Rick began to retch, and to make things worse, the strings suddenly snapped, dropping the poor kid's lifeless body onto the crumpled heap of rotting kid meat on the floor. I rushed towards it, to find that a large man-sized hole in the ceiling that led to the attic. I couldn't see anything up there, so I ran back to try and catch the sick person that would have done this to a little boy. Rick had gone, I assumed, back to A and B to call for help. But when I got up there was no one there. A window in the attic was open, but it was far too small for someone to have escaped through. It didn't make any sense. I noticed a small tape recorder on the floor. I swear I didn't even press play on the damn thing, but it just started to make sounds. It was muffled, but I eventually made out what sounded like a 911 call in Samuel's voice. It had been recorded. I realized then and there that the whole thing was some perverted setup. The forensics team was called to clear the crime scene away, and we filed a report. But we had no suspects. The poor kid's body had been washed with bleach, and there was no foreign DNA on him. He had been assaulted. His genitalia was swollen and bruised, and his throat and orifice was filled with fissures. The perpetrator had most likely moved his body to the abandoned house from the original crime scene to further hide his identity. We never found the guy. Thing is, when they went to search the house the next day, they found footprints in the snow leading up to the woods. The soles of the shoes were sanded down, so they couldn't reveal any recognizable shoe brand or print. If he left after we did, which is the most likely scenario seen, as we didn't see anyone leave, nor were the prints there before, it meant he was still inside the house with us. That's the bit that always screws with me the most. He was probably still in the attic whilst I hopelessly searched for him, probably grinning at me from the darkness. My best guess is, he was standing on the wooden beams above me. You know those beams that keep the roof stable? That sick person was probably staring down at me. It still didn't make any sense as to how nobody found him when the whole forensics team and other fresh-eyed cops were searching the place. Maybe he was hiding in the walls. I'm not really sure. I don't really want to know. I've removed myself from that case. That's why I started drinking, son. You see, Samuel looked a lot like you, and he got kidnapped off his bike. All I could think about was that if it happened to you, what if that sick person had gotten to you? It still haunts me to think about it. Rick and I used to talk about it, you know. Speculate about it. That young fella, B, quit almost immediately after that and moved towns. Apparently, they found CP on his computer, but it was just a rumor some of the other guys came up with as a sick joke. Still sticks with me, that one. That's when my dad stopped talking about it. He said he didn't want to talk anymore, and I understood why. It makes me feel sick just thinking about it. Thanks for listening, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your own story, the links for my email and subreddit will be down below. I've also created a Discord, so if you want to join that, the link will be in the description down below as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that said, have beautiful nightmares, and I will see you next time.